Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and we are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through your life and with your relationship with Christ. We just finished our series, I should say, on homeschooling. We've begun a transition into kind of talking about more countercultural topics in the secular world that we live in, but today's guest really merges between both of those because she is a homeschooling mom and is kind of bridging the gap between these discussions that we've been having. So today we are welcoming Adriana Zoder, and she is an author, a blogger, a newspaper columnist, and a polyglot, which I'll let her explain more about that. But she lives in Gatlinburg, and she's been homeschooling her two children since 2013, when her oldest started kindergarten. Zoder blogs at homeschoolways.com, has published 15 books, and has been a writing and lifestyle column for the Mountain Press since 2011. Also a TEDx UTK speaker on the topic of multilingualism, which is awesome, and also speaks several languages and is passionate about communication. I'm so excited to learn from you today and hear more about your story. Adriana, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to give back to the homeschool community. When I got started 11 years ago, and even longer, because I did research for 2 years before I officially got started in 2013. A lot of homeschool moms helped me.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's so awesome to be giving back to those moms that are where you were at that time. I'm sure, I know that we all have a lot of questions and then have questions as we're going along in our path as things change. So thank you for giving back. And our kind of segue into the conversation is that homeschooling is really still today even seen as kind of a countercultural choice. Most kids are going to some form of school, public school, private school, and homeschooling is kind of considered outside of that in today's secular environment. So tell us about what led you to this path, and how has homeschooling impacted your family life?
So I never knew about homeschooling until I went to college, and I went to college in Virginia. And some of my friends were homeschool graduates,
Hmm.
and they were impressive. So I first was introduced to the product of homeschooling,
Okay.
but I laughed. I laughed at the whole idea of homeschooling. Like, what mom in her right mind would give a B to her own child, right? So it's unfair. It's unfair because everybody's going to get an A. And I didn't realize that a lot of moms would be responsible enough to make the child earn the A.
Mm.
That was a new concept.
Mhm. Mhm.
Fast forward a few years, I had to read a book by Raymond Moore for my minor in education. And it
Okay.
was one of his homeschool books. Raymond Moore, Dr. Raymond Moore, the grandfather of homeschooling in America.
Mhm.
I think it was the book about readiness, school readiness. I think it's called the Better Late Than Early.
Okay.
Better Late Than Early.
Okay.
And then I met him when I worked after graduation. I worked in Sweden for a homeschool, for a nonprofit educational foundation, and he came to give one of our modules. And I met him, and we talked. And then a year later, long story short, he invited me to work for him in Washington State at his foundation, the Moore Foundation, which is still around. And so we worked together a little bit. So I got to know him. I understood homeschooling as a theory. I understood the background, the objections to it, how to meet them, how these parents were actually doing it. And then I also saw the product. So I saw the theory, I learned the theory, I saw the product. And so I had the whole circle of understanding what homeschooling is. I was still single.
Mhm.
I was not a mom. So again, we move up to 2007. I become a mom. My husband and I talked about, if we have kids, what's going to happen? Where do we school choice? And we said, well, we are in Gatlinburg. You, my husband, are from Gatlinburg. You graduated from these local schools. they're okay. When you look at their school cards
Mhm.
online, they're okay.
Mhm.
The local high school where he graduated from produces National Merit Scholars, at least one every year. So we thought, okay, with our involvement, we're going to be fine. Well, then I became a mom. This was the conversation in premarital counseling.
Yeah,
When you become a mom, you become a whole new person.
absolutely.
I think we are chemically wired to protect our children, to
Yes.
guide them, to
Yes.
care for them, to feed them. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden you become aware of dangers all around them,
Mhm.
intellectual dangers, physical dangers, emotional dangers. And then my child now, my son is 3, my daughter's 1. The year is 2011, and I'm finding myself thinking more and more about homeschooling.
Mhm.
And I went to my husband. I said, I think I want to homeschool the kids. And he said, no. We had several conversations. And finally, I went to him and I found myself doing research at night. I would put them
Mhm.
to bed at 7 p.m. and then I would do
Mhm.
research. And I found out that my local homeschool moms would take them to the zoo in Knoxville or to the aquarium because they actually have homeschool classes at both the zoo and the aquarium. And I would tell my husband the next day, hey, guess what? These moms take their kids to the zoo and he would say to me, of course they take them there. Where else would they take them? So for a few months, I sort of did research on my own, knowing that he was against it. We finally came to the point where I was also doing research on local schools. I went to a PTA meeting. I reached out to both principals. Where we live, we can take our kids in many different places. We're not bound by the street where we
Mhm.
live on.
Mhm.
And then there were some private schools that I visited that I looked at. But homeschooling kept coming back to me and back to me. And I was like, what is this? This has got to be God's voice.
Mhm.
I finally went to my husband. I said, listen, I really want to homeschool. And he said, no, that's it. This is the end of our conversation. We're done talking about this. So I said, okay. So I cried and I said, don't worry about my tears. I feel like I'm losing a dream. I feel like God put something in my heart and I
Mhm.
have to give it up. And I'm okay with it because I'm raising these children with you.
Mhm.
And God gave you to me and me to you. And so we're making this decision as a family. And maybe it's not for us. Maybe that was just some crazy idea I had. But I said, let me recover from this. And he's like, okay. A few hours later, he comes back to me and says, all right, you can homeschool, but I've got 3 conditions. 1, we test them every year outside the home. I want to make sure that academically they're making progress. 2, if I see anything funny in their social skills, we're putting them back in school. We're putting them in school.
Mhm.
And 3, if we're just going to take this 1 year at a time.
Mhm.
Okay, so you can homeschool this year or whenever we start. But then at the end of the year, we make a decision based on what we say, okay. And I said, thank you very much. I was very happy. But I said, what changed your mind?
Mhm.
And he said, when he walked away from our conversation, he had this bad feeling about him.
Mhm.
And he thought, why should I be the big bad wolf that's keeping my wife from her desire? Here's my wife, and I trust her. And she wants to do this one thing.
Mhm.
Why should I be the one stopping her? She's going to stop herself soon enough. She's going to burn out. This is crazy. This homeschooling is crazy. It's hard. She's going to burn out. So let her be the one saying, I'm done.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
tried.
Mhm.
He did not want to take responsibility for my, he didn't want to make a decision for me. If I wanted to pursue this, he said, 1 year at a time, let's go.
Sure.
After that first year, he was so happy he never looked back. He
Oh,
is an
wow.
advocate. Yeah, he's an advocate for homeschool. Our children score. I don't want to brag too much. And somebody told me a long time ago, don't put your children's scores on the internet because they'll always be there. But let's just say that they score above the 90th percentile in nationally standardized tests. We've been doing that since first grade. They get compliments all the time from people about their conversational skills, about their people skills. They're doing great.
There's no better person to teach a child than their mother. I mean, and you are a very well-spoken, educated woman. Of course, your children are going to be smart and well-spoken, and they're reflecting what you're teaching them. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. I'm glad he came around. I can relate to that though, because I was actually homeschooled as a child. And like you said, when you encountered people in college, I started college at 16 because I was homeschooled and we do that. And my husband he actually went to private school his whole life. And he just was like, homeschool, this is like, what are you going to do? He wanted me to almost show him the curriculum. And I'm talking about for preschool here. So I can very much relate that there's a skepticism behind homeschooling when you haven't done it before, when you don't know people that have been homeschooled. You just see things on TV or you hear things or the kids that struggle socially. It can be hard to fully understand what homeschooling really is. But it's a beautiful thing. And I just wanted to ask you, where are you from originally? I know that multilingualism is a big thing. So, what is your first language?
So Romanian, I grew up in Romania. I was born in Romania.
Okay.
And I've always had this inclination, this natural talent, this natural propensity towards languages.
Hmm.
So in school in Romania, everybody learns two languages. I had
Okay.
French and English.
Okay. Oh,
And
well, in addition to Romanian.
oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know Romanian because that's the language that you're speaking with your family. Then you learn French and English.
hmm And we
Cool.
started French in fifth grade and English in sixth grade. So all the
Okay.
way through the 12th grade, I had 8 years of French and 7 years of English.
Okay.
Of course, it's Europe, so I'm surrounded by songs and movies in Italian and Spanish and French and English all the time
Hmm.
with captions on the screen. They weren't doing voiceovers back then.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I understand in Romania there's a lot of voiceovers going on
Okay.
in movies, but back then I grew up hearing the language and seeing the Romanian
The
captioning,
translation.
and that
Okay.
taught me a lot of expressions in a lot of languages. So I just
Interesting.
naturally felt myself attracted to linguistics, Romanian grammar, Romanian literature, and then French and English. So naturally, I love it. But I grew up in the 80s before the Berlin Wall fell. So it was behind the Iron Curtain, as Americans say. Our borders were closed, and everybody was directing me towards STEM fields like
Mhm.
math and physics and chemistry. And, computers were coming around, and they're like, forget languages. You're not going to go anywhere. You cannot travel anywhere. No foreigners can come in. You
Hmm.
can't do anything with languages other than become a language teacher. And we know what happens to all our French and foreign language teachers. They have a file with the Romanian secret police, the Romanian KGB,
Hmm.
because they're able to speak with the outside world. So they're under surveillance more than the regular folks.
Hmm.
Because if any foreigner comes in, they're going to need a translator. And so all these teachers that spoke different languages were under more surveillance than the usual people, the average Joe, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Mhm.
So they said, just go into math and physics. And so another detail about Romania is that we have majors in high school. So when you get to seventh grade, eighth grade, you already have to orient yourself. Where do I go?
Mhm.
So everybody said math and physics, of course. So I got really good at Romanian, French, and English because I liked it.
Mhm.
And I got really good. Oh, and we took Latin also for a couple of years in Romania. Our language is a Romance language, so it's Latin based. So we're very proud of that, and so we learned Latin. Everybody learned Latin.
Wow.
So, and then I learned math and physics and chemistry because I had to, because I was going, that was my major in high school. It was math and physics. And then I get to the 11th grade, and my French teacher loved me. My English teacher loved me. I was like the only kid in that math and physics classroom that learned their language. They would come in and they would have conversations with me, and everybody would just sit there and, you know. So the English teacher was very good friends with a chemistry teacher. And one day, the chemistry teacher, when I was a junior, 11th grade, she asked me a question. She was testing me orally in front of everybody. I was at the blackboard back then. And then finally she said, hey, Timsha, where are you going to college? Timsha was my maiden name, my last name.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm going to go into physics and chemistry. I want to be a teacher of physics and chemistry. I didn't like math as much. I mean, I liked math. I was good at it, but physics and chemistry made more sense. And she goes, you're not a chemist. I talked to your English teacher. You're a linguist. What are you doing? By then, it was 1991. The Berlin Wall fell in 89. We got freedom and democracy in Romania also, December of 1989. The Berlin Wall fell in November. We got our freedom in December. And everything opened up. We had all kinds of foreign programming. We had foreign investors invading the country. She's like, listen up. You're going to have a career as a translator. All these opportunities are coming into the country. All the Europeans, all the Americans, everybody's coming in. You need, and I talked to my friend, your English teacher. It's your stuff. You're a linguist. Thank God for teachers who, she could have claimed me as her little trophy. Oh, she's going to be a chemistry major. She's going to the university and she's going to see my professors that, now I'm sending them a good student. And she goes, you're not a chemist. You're a linguist. Switch. So at the last minute, spring of junior year in high school, I'm telling my French and English teacher, by the way, I'm going to major in that. And the admissions exam in Europe, not just in Romania, is not like an SAT or an ACT like here. You're going to be tested on the things that you're going to study. So I needed to prepare heavily in French, English, and Romanian grammar. And so I started some private tutoring for Romanian grammar, which I hadn't done in a long time. We are doing a heavy load on literature, but not so much grammar. And grammar is very specific. And anyway, and then French and English, they just gave me the literary commentaries for free. Both teachers. I told them my parents can't afford private tutoring. They just gave me these pages and pages of commentaries that I had to memorize. So when they said, I had 3 different exams, Romanian, French, and English. Before even you could go in there to study, to do a written exam, you had an oral exam in French, which was pass or fail. Read this passage, translate this passage from Romanian to French, and translate this passage from French to Romanian. So if you couldn't do that, then they wouldn't even let you go into the writing thing. And it was the same thing if you went to law or to economics or to math, or you had to be tested in those things. So all of a sudden, I'm switching gears and I'm studying. So I went to the University of Bucharest. I got in. Thank God. There was like 200 of us with 40 seats. So 5 people for 1 seat. And I was lucky number 13 on the list. The number 1 girl, just so you know, who I was competing against. She was the daughter of the ambassador of the Republic of Moldova, and her father used to be their ambassador in Paris to France when she was growing up. So she went to school in France. Okay. So she was number 1 on the list. I mean, she just spoke like a native.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got in, and then I loved it. It was very tough, but I finished my freshman year. And that's when I met some people. I was volunteering at a Christian radio station as a translator. They got a lot of international mail, French, English. So I was there to translate, but they started training me on how to put stuff together for radio. And then I met some people from a college in Virginia who were visiting, and they said, "Hey, you want to come translate for us in Transylvania this summer for 3 weeks? We've got an extension school." I said, "Sure." They're like, "We need translators." And while I was there, I just had this conviction to drop what I was doing and go attend this Bible college in Virginia,
Mhm.
which was kind of crazy. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I approached one of the professors, and he's like, "I was going to ask you what it would take for you to come to the United States." And so we applied, we faxed my application in at the last minute from a little remote village in Transylvania. And I say village, Americans think, African villages with huts. And it was a small town. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
And I got accepted, I got a scholarship, and I
Wow.
went to Virginia. And I did 4 years in Christian publications management.
Amazing. And I
Yeah.
have a feeling that was probably a bit of a culture change for you going from living in Europe to living in Virginia. I mean, it's a pretty big change. And I'm sure a lot of differences now you have learned English, but now you're being exposed to dialects and accents and things like that. How was that transition?
It's not so bad because I was already fluent and I was reading Charles Dickens and Shakespeare in English. So I knew a
Okay.
lot of English compared to some other Romanians or other international students. We had a lot of international students who struggled because
Mhm.
their level of English was not as advanced as mine. But banana split, I had no idea what that is. Cafeteria, I had no idea what that is. So there were specific things like knob, a door knob. I
Mhm.
didn't know what that was. Hanger. What's a hanger? You don't read that in Dickens, you know.
Yeah, it's the little things. And
Yeah.
now, if we think about America today, every different place in America, they'll have different names that they call things that are always a little bit funny. I think here in Tennessee, they say buggy instead of shopping cart,
Hmm.
or we're pretty close to the border of being soda versus pop and things like that. Just cultural differences
Yeah.
that I find to be interesting. So I'll tell you, I actually went to college for English, the English language, and went to grad school, and my graduate degree is in English. And the hardest class that I ever took was the history of the English language. It was the hardest grad school class because you're learning English from the history, the etymology of how English came to be what it is. And it's not the easiest of languages. There's a lot of things about English that don't make sense, as I'm sure you have experienced, but I think it's so cool that you know and understand and speak multiple languages. I've been trying to learn Spanish for, I don't know, my whole life. And I know little things here and there, but I struggle it doesn't connect for me. I think that it sounds like the way that it connects for you. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. Your TEDx talk was on multilingualism. Tell me a little bit about that.
So mm, after I graduated from college, I accepted a job in Sweden for a nonprofit organization, and the language spoken on campus was English.
Okay.
The director and his wife were French, so it was perfect. I spoke French to them. They
Mhm.
loved it. We all spoke English to the students and to each other in official capacities. But then you sort of learn Swedish because you're there.
Okay.
The advantage with living in Sweden is that everybody speaks English over there. So we would walk into a store, and if we had a question, we would just blah 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 in English,
Mhm.
and everybody responded to you in English. They didn't have any questions. They were not offended. Like if you go to France and you start speaking to them in English, they'll be offended. But
I've heard that.
but the Swedes are fine with it. So and because I was the administrative assistant, they said you kind of have to know Swedish because you get all these letters in the office. So we're gonna put you to school. So the good thing is the Swedish government has these free evening classes for Swedish for anybody that lives in Sweden. So I would
Hmm.
take the bus and learn. First, I learned with a tape, a cassette tape. I kid you not, cassette tape with a book. So
Okay.
I got myself pretty advanced in Sweden. Advanced. I was still a beginner, but pretty, I wasn't anymore at the level of, I have no idea that you just said hello to me or good morning. And then I went to school, for Swedish. And then 2 years later, I moved to Stockholm. I took another job. So this was in rural Sweden, working for the nonprofit. And then I got another job working in Stockholm for a telecom. I switched the for-profit sector. I was a little burnt out of nonprofits. So when I was there, I got really immersed in Swedish. So I would wake up in the morning, listen to Swedish news while I was getting ready on the radio. On the metro, the underground subway, I would read a newspaper in Swedish. And of course, I didn't understand anything in the beginning, just the word here and there. But over time, I just immersed myself in it. At work, I would ask my colleagues to speak to me in Swedish. My roommate was a Swedish teacher from Hungary. And she said to me, for the first 3 months, I'll speak to you in English, but as you get better, we're going to switch to Swedish. So she would drill me in the morning and the evening when we saw each other. And then, of course, on the way back, I would stop by the evening Swedish class. I would take that class, and so I was there in August of 2000 is when I took that job in Stockholm, and by January, I was pretty fluent in Swedish, and I would solve, any kind of errands I would run. I would do them in Swedish now. I wasn't doing them in English anymore. So Swedish is quite simple to learn as far as grammar, but their vocabulary is tricky. And they don't have genders. Like in German, you have masculine, feminine, neutral nouns. In English, you don't have that, right? A squirrel is a squirrel. In Romanian, a squirrel is a feminine noun. A chair is a neutral noun. A boy is a masculine noun. In Swedish, they have n and et words that end in n and words that end in et. And it's like, how do you decide that? And it's all about memorization. So that's the tricky part about Swedish, but their grammar is very easy.
That's interesting. Wow. I didn't know that about Swedish, but I assumed that it's not the easiest language to learn because a lot of the words seem complicated.
Oh, it's interesting to move from like, it sounds like Chinese to finally understanding, oh, he said water. I heard the word water, and then to, oh, he asked me if I want another glass of water. And you move from nothing to that in like 6 months, so it's pretty spacey.
Yeah, I bet. Now, do your children speak multiple languages?
So now into multilingualism, I tried. The answer is yes, they speak Romanian, because when I was raising them, I spoke Romanian to them. I tried hard with French and I failed. They don't like it. They don't understand it. They don't want to learn it. They want nothing to do with French. So that's one big failure.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah, their American dad, of course, speaks English to them. They were raised in America.
That's
so
what my other question was going to be, does he speak multiple languages?
No.
No. Okay.
No, he was born and raised in Tennessee, so he's got a beautiful Southern accent. And I think he took French a little bit in middle school, and then he took some Spanish in high school, or maybe still French, but he remembers little things like mademoiselle.
Sure. Yeah. French is not the easiest language to speak. I did take reading for research in French when I was in grad school, and I did fine because I was just reading and translating, but we never had to speak it. I would say the speaking part of it and the conversational part of it, when you speak English, is probably there's a lot of linguistic changes that occur, kind of like with Spanish too, though. I mean, a lot of languages, there's the tongue part that we have to adapt to.
Well, that's the hardest part, even for an advanced speaker. I came here, like I said, with advanced knowledge of English, and I would still make simple grammar mistakes in speaking because you're not used to speaking so much. So that's like the highest level in having a command of a language, to have conversations, not to write in that language, but to actually have conversations at a higher level, where you can, express yourself with no grammar mistakes, with no weird pronunciation, and so on.
Hmm. What advice would you give a homeschooling mom that might want to teach her child another language? Are there any tricks to it? Start them when they're young, wait till they're a certain age? Because it was interesting. You said you were about sixth grade when you started learning other languages. So, was that a good time for you to start learning? Or, I mean, obviously, if you already speak another language, speaking to your children in that language from the time they're born is going to help. But yeah, any advice that you could give to other homeschool moms?
Does the mom in your question know the target language?
I would say no, because I would be an example of that, right? Like I would love to teach my children other languages. I took Spanish when I was homeschooled from a native Spanish speaker externally. We would go to her house once a week and have our lessons, and then in between, we'd work on things. That was how my mom chose to do it because she couldn't speak Spanish. And so I can understand. I grew up in Florida, so kind of understanding Spanish was important because it's a big cultural thing down there. And again, I can understand certain things, but I am still not to the point of being able to hold a full conversation.
So, if you speak the language, absolutely speak to them from birth. Children are wired, their brains are wired to speak as a baby. They hear, you adopt a baby from China, you bring them here, you speak to them in English, they will never speak Chinese.
Sure.
Okay. So, if you have the language, if you don't have the language, then you're limited to YouTube videos, DVDs that you can get with that language, and definitely get them the books in those languages. Try to learn a little bit alongside them,
Mm,
but immersion.
mhm,
If you can hire somebody that speaks that language as a tutor
mm,
that comes to your house 2 or 3 times a week and has conversations with the kid, if your nanny can speak that language, that would be great. If you
mhm,
can travel to that country and immerse them for 2 weeks at least at a time,
mhm,
once a year, 2 weeks in that country where they are just surrounded by that culture and the language, then it would make more sense and they will have it. Otherwise, it's not going to stick.
mhm. Yeah, it's tough. It's not an easy thing. So I'd also love to hear a little bit about, I know you've written a lot of books, you have the blog. Tell us a little bit about your passion for writing, how that has incorporated into your life now as a homeschool mom, and just kind of what you're up to, I guess.
Okay, so when I became a mom, I started a blog about being a mom, and it didn't really go anywhere, and I didn't really have a direction. Then, when I became a homeschooling mom, I thought, this is it. I'm going to document what we're doing, the curriculum we're taking, not just for me, but also for my skeptical family members. I was a little bit afraid also of the authorities, even though I was doing everything by the book and the law's pretty relaxed in Tennessee. But I was just like, let me just put something out there. We're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this, just to cover all my bases. I had some family members who yelled at me, okay, about homeschooling. And then I had others who were quietly, politely accepting my choice, but you could just tell they didn't like it. I had everything in between. So I did it for them, I did it for me, I did it for the authorities. Now I look back on it and I think, I don't remember doing this curriculum. There are things that we did in 11 years of homeschooling. I don't even remember. I'm so glad I kept, uh,
Documented it.
yeah,
Hmm.
documentation about it.
Hmm.
Writing, when you are naturally a lover of words, you just, I don't know, for me, things just ooze out of me. Like I think about things all the time and I read a lot and I make connections and I hear things in my head and I'm thinking, oh, that would make a good column. Oh, that would make a good blog post. That would be a great idea for a book. Things come to me. I don't know how to explain my creative process. But having said all that, all my books are nonfiction. Most of them are about homeschooling. One of the books is a collection of my columns from the newspaper for the first, I think, 5 years, because I started with that in 2011 before I even homeschooled.
Okay.
So I just kind of gathered all my columns and put them in a volume for the first 5 years of homeschooling, of writing for the paper. And writing for the paper, I don't know, one day my kids were 1 and 3, and I was ironing and I was crying because I was exhausted. The hardest time for a mom, I think, is when you go from one child to two. And then if you have like a 2 year difference, like I did, more than 2 years for me, but my son was 3, my daughter was 1, and I was exhausted. I don't know what possessed me. I was ironing. Like, who irons these days, right? And I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to reach out to the local newspaper editor and start a column. It's like, it just made me feel like a human being again. It made me feel like a productive member of society. I wasn't just somebody who provided meals and clean clothes for my children and my husband. I grew up in a culture where moms worked.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mommyhood was not celebrated in Romania.
Mm.
Being a stay-at-home mom was not a badge of honor. It wasn't like a status symbol. Oh, my husband makes enough money, I can stay home with the kids. No, that did not exist growing up under communism.
Oh, interesting.
Everybody
Yeah.
went to work. Everybody went to work. If you didn't go to work, you were either handicapped or you were a parasite. They were called literally a parasite of society. Everybody had a job. Now, the
Wow.
jobs were fake. The factories went bankrupt, of course, once the system collapsed, because reality had to hit the bottom line of everybody's production. But everybody had a job. And so being a mom wasn't a full time job. I had a friend, very good friend with a PhD, very smart American woman, when I gave birth to my first child. And she said to me, Adriana, the first 5 years of your child's life before they go to school, that's the best time. Stay at home with them. Don't put them in daycare. Don't put them in preschool. On the floor with blocks, take them to preschool reading time at the library and read books to them. That's the best use of your time. You will never regret spending the first 5 years of your children's life on the floor with blocks. And when I heard that from a very smart woman with a PhD in psychology, I thought, I'm going to do that. When my mom heard that, she was protesting. You have a college degree. What do you mean? Put them in daycare and go to, get a job. I was like, no. My mom came to visit when my daughter was born. We're talking 2010. And so one time I went to the bank with her. I had her in the car with the kids and I was making a bank deposit and I left. And mom goes, see, you could go be a bank teller. Kids would be fine. They would just be over there at the First Baptist Church where they have a Mother's Day Out program. You could just, I was like, Mom, no,
Mm.
no. So I had to fight a lot of cultural differences
Yeah.
once I became a mom.
Yeah.
And that was countercultural to me as a Romanian, right? As an
Absolutely.
immigrant into this culture. Once I brought homeschooling up, that was a whole new level of protest.
I'm sure if just staying home with the kids was controversial, schooling them at home, I'm sure was the next level.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I went back to Romania in 2016. I went several times, but the last time I got invited by a Christian television station to give a couple of interviews, and one of them was about homeschooling, and the lady was trained as a psychologist, and she spent the whole hour with questions that sounded like barbs to against homeschooling, how it's not good for the children's psyche to be at home. Other kids, I'm like, you don't understand. They have other kids around them, just not for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
And so I kept being positive about homeschooling and avoiding her barbs in this interview. And finally, at the very end, she goes, "My last question. Could you please tell us some of the drawbacks of homeschooling?" So,
And you're
yeah,
like, it sounds like you've already addressed all of those, lady. That's all we've been talking about here." It
exactly.
absolutely is interesting. I hadn't thought about it from your perspective of being from Europe and being from another country and being from Romania specifically, of what that must be like, what the culture is like there and how they are supportive or non-supportive of homeschooling. There's this woman that I follow on Instagram that travels the world with her. She has two daughters and she's a single mom and she homeschools them, but she has a remote business through social media where she sells digital products so she can live anywhere. And she's always going here to and fro. And she has mentioned that some cultures are very not understanding of homeschooling, where others are. She's currently in Nova Scotia, Canada, and apparently they're very welcoming to homeschooling in that specific area. And I found that to be really interesting to see her kind of going all around the world. And she was in Europe for a while, and how that must look to other people and other cultures. I'm so used to defending homeschooling to Americans, let alone to other countries. Even here, talking to a woman down the street about homeschooling is controversial. My daughter's at the age where she's 4 now, she's almost 5, and everywhere that she goes, when they ask her, "How old are you?" She'll say 4, almost 5. "Oh, so you're going to go to kindergarten next year?" And she just kind of looks at them because we started school when she was 3. We started
Sure.
doing things together. She's been learning since she was born. And she'll say, I'll kind of prompt her a little. I'll say, "Actually, she's already started doing some things." And I say, "Where do we go to school?" And she'll look at the person and say, "That's right. We homeschool." And, people are pretty positive about it here in Tennessee. And they'll say, "Oh, that's great." But then there's people that'll just be like, they don't know how to respond to it. It's a very interesting conversation to have. And I was homeschooled back in the late 80s and 90s when homeschooling was becoming a thing. My parents actually were a part of legalizing homeschooling in the state of Florida back in the early 70s, or in the 70s, churning to the 80s, because truancy was a big thing back then and there weren't laws about homeschooling and they had to go lobby and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely become more popular, but there are still barriers. And you have such a unique story in that, where you are from, it is completely countercultural versus here it is, but it's different.
And let me say something about the homeschoolers from Romania.
Oh, tell me about that.
They don't have laws to say
Okay.
homeschooling is legal. There's no actual law.
Okay.
But some of these moms somehow through their research found my blog, and when they heard that I was in Romania, they invited me to speak to a few of them. So I spoke to about, I don't know, 50 women who homeschooled in a park. We were in a park in Bucharest, and I said, well, you guys need to band together and create. There is an association that works with HSLDA,
Hmm.
and there's a president. I spoke to him. They have little conventions, and I said, you guys need a law. You need to go to the parliament. They don't have Congress, they have parliament,
Hmm.
and lobby for. And they said, we don't want it right now. The law is vague. As long as you are signed up as an online course taker,
Okay.
they sign up in England, they sign up with Home Life Academy in Tennessee,
Okay.
they sign up with all these umbrella programs, and officially they have a paper that they can show to anybody coming to their door saying, oh no, my child is not in school physically any day, but he is actually in school. Look, we are taking correspondence courses. That's what they
Okay.
call it. And they
Okay.
said, we don't want that because we know regulation is coming in. If you say
Sure.
yes, it is legal, then want to have teachers and inspectors and professors that come in and say, you got to teach this and you got to teach that. And they go,
Yes.
we don't want that. We want total freedom.
Yes, that's a really good point. I think that's been kind of a conversation lately with politics, right? Because they're coming out with, oh, homeschoolers are going to get X amount of money or whatnot. And I know a lot of people in the homeschooler community are like, just leave us alone. We don't want anything from you, government. Just
I don't
leave
want your
us
money.
be. We don't want your money. We don't want your rules coming into what we're doing. Just let us do what we're doing here. What about other countries in Europe? Are there any that are homeschooling friendly?
England is very homeschooling friendly. Sweden, Germany are not. Holland is not. If you go to the HSLDA page, you will see there are pages for different countries. My mom had a friend in Spain. My mom lived in Spain for 17 years. And some of her Spanish friends were asking her to put me in touch with them to help them. And all I could do is HSLDA, you know. And there is
Mhm.
a page for the Spanish Homeschool Association. So I would direct anybody to that and look for specific information for each country. But I do have a story about Holland. The year was 1999, and I was talking to a family of homeschoolers from Holland who got interviewed on TV. Their daughters were teenagers. They had two daughters, teenagers, and they got interviewed on this program for youth. And they were told, we're going to ask you this and this and this. And they were treating them like they were, animals from a zoo, just rare specimens of this thing called homeschooling, in Holland. We don't do that, but here's this family that does it. So here they are. And so they treat them very nicely in the green room, saying, here are the questions, get some answers right. When they got in front of the camera, they were not nice to them. They asked them all these questions with innuendos, that they're weirdos, that they don't talk to people. It was very different from what they had prepared. So it was a bit of a trap. And so they said, we know, we learn our lesson. We don't do that anymore. We don't give interviews anymore.
Mm.
That was, like I said, 1998, 1999.
That's interesting. It kind of reminds me of I personally get a little bit, maybe I'll use the word offended. I get offended on behalf of other people. And there has been situations, so like I said, I grew up, being homeschooled in the 90s mostly, early 90s through that. And a lot of mothers that would pull their kids from school were because of learning disabilities that weren't yet understood. So a lot of ADHD and autism and that type of, on the spectrum type of behavioral stuff that wasn't understood at that time. The way that, there are special programs today, they didn't have that then. And so there were mothers that were pulling their kids out because they knew that school was not the right place for their child. And so when I hear people say things like, oh, homeschoolers are weird, it offends me because a lot of these children have learning disabilities or some sort of behavioral issue that the mother is keeping them home to give them the best life possible. Would anybody say that about a kid who's in a special needs class? That's what I would ask. Would you say that about those children that are in the special needs classroom, that they're weird? That would be one of the most rude, horrific, crude things that you could say to a person. Yet people say that about homeschoolers, not knowing what that child's particular situation might be. So I personally kind of find that to be a little bit offensive when it comes to the way that people talk about homeschoolers because you don't know someone's situation. And I find that the majority of homeschoolers are very well socialized. If anything, can hold much stronger and better conversations with when compared to a public school child down the street, right? I mean, that's just my opinion on it though. I don't know if that's something that you've run into as well. It's kind of that perception that people have, and they also like to group um, all children together into one bucket.
Yes, yes, they do that a lot. And I'm with you. I get offended, then I get over it. Then
Exactly.
I
They just don't
sometimes
understand.
Yeah, sometimes I have a ready answer. Sometimes I'm just quiet. I
Hmm.
was in a business meeting. I have a small business. That's something else off the topic, but I have a small soap and candle business that I started, but I shouldn't have. Don't start a business while you're homeschooling. Please learn from me. Um, but I was in a networking business, and this lady said something negative about the socialization of homeschool kids, and I had laryngitis at the time and I was quiet. I couldn't speak. I would have said something to her, but I just had to sit there and go, she doesn't understand.
She doesn't understand. And that's the thing is a lot of times it's just they just don't understand the situation. But
And
speaking
my,
of
yeah,
passing things along, I'd love to know for any parents that might just be beginning their homeschooling journey and want to pursue this. First of all, I think that your story is extremely inspiring already, and people are going to be inspired by this. But what would be one key piece of advice that you wish you would have received when you started?
don't do too much. Just calm down. It's okay. Just read to them for 20 minutes in the morning. We're talking small children that are just beginning.
Mhm.
Read to them for 20 minutes. Do a little math with them with little teddy bear counters or whatever, beans on the table, and then maybe read to them again in the evening for 20 minutes. Take a walk, let them get dirty outside. That's it. That's enough in the beginning.
Yeah,
And then I was doing too much because ambition kicks in. And
sure.
of course, I've got a background of, I've got a college degree and I speak all these languages, and I want them to know where Brussels is. And, you know, I wanted them to learn everything so fast, so much of it. And then I read Susan Weiss Bauer, Well Trained Mind. That doesn't help. So I love Susan Weiss Bauer. I went to some of her workshops in person. But even she herself, and I heard her with my own 2 years, she said, I wrote the ideal blueprint of a homeschool in my book. I didn't follow it. I had 4 children. This is Susan Weiss Bauer talking. I'm quoting her sort of, not verbatim. She said, I have 4 children. They were all different. I couldn't do what I wrote in that book with each one of these children.
Mhm.
So as a beginner in homeschooling, you know your children, you know your values as a family, as a mom, as a Christian or non Christian, whatever you are, you know your values, you know your children, do your research, make your pick, and just calm down. Just slowly, every
Yeah,
day, just give them something.
I love that. That's such great advice. Is there anything else that you want to share with listeners or pass along as we are wrapping up today?
I think everybody's different, everybody has different needs. I see people searching on my blog for different topics. Everybody's on a different level, you know. I
Mm.
had to recently give myself a sabbatical from blogging because I was doing too much and I got really sick in September. I'm a lot better now, but something had to give. And I
Mm.
found myself doing the same things over and over again on my blog. And I said, something has to stop. So I'm keeping my column going. I haven't been writing books. I haven't published any books in a while for the same thing. There's only so much of me.
Mhm.
So just calm down, focus on your kids. These years are gonna go by so fast. And right now I'm heading into college admission tunnel vision.
That's
So
exciting. Scary
yeah,
and
so
exciting, I'm sure.
yeah, and I'm doing a lot of research. Like when they were preschoolers, at night I'm
Mhm.
there researching colleges and majors, and which my son wants to work for SpaceX.
Okay.
So I'm finding myself Googling which universities does SpaceX recruit from. So
Interesting.
then I have to go and research, what majors do they have and all this stuff. So it's very, very interesting. Just do your research as a homeschool mom, follow your heart, see where the peace is.
Mhm.
Because if you have peace in your heart when you make a decision, that's how you know you are within God's will. And that is the ideal for all of us. If I am within God's will, I don't care what so and so says. I don't care what, they just told me. I know I'm doing what I know God is calling me to do for my family, for my children. and just follow your heart, follow that peace.
Beautiful. That's great advice. Adriana, thank you so much for joining today and sharing your story. This has been so inspiring.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
I'm so glad I could do this.
Me too. Me too. And if you are looking for her outside the podcast, you can find Adriana at www.homeschoolways.com. That's WAYS. Also on Facebook and Pinterest and on Twitter, or now called X, at Homeschool Ways. So facebook.com/homeschool ways. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in and for being on this journey with us. If you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, you can do so on Instagram at The Radiant Mission, Facebook at The Radiant Mission Podcast, or if you're not already watching this on YouTube, you can find it on YouTube by searching for my name, Rebecca Toomey, youtube.com/Rebecca Toomey, or by searching for The Radiant Mission. And today we are going to close with Philippians 1 verse 3. Adriana mentioned to me that it gives her hope that she is on a journey with God and he started this work in her and he will complete it. And it's encouraging, especially on days when I feel like I have not lived up to all the light I have. And that verse is, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. We are wishing you a radiant week and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.